Blackmagic's line of pocket cinema cameras are incredibly well known for being really great value cinema cameras for independent filmmakers, professionals, and everything and anywhere in between. That's why I bought my Pocket 6K Pro almost a year and a half ago now, and I've been loving it ever since. But quite recently, I've been taking my Pocket 6K Pro for a lot of travel trips around the world, and I really wanted to share with you my thoughts on how I've been using it for travel and whether or not it might be right for you, and if it's just a good camera to use for travel in general. I've taken it on 2 trips so far this year, one to Bali and one to Vietnam, and I'm really looking forward to taking it to Europe later in the year, and I wanted to share with you my thoughts on how the whole experiences have been. Now firstly, let's start off with the rig that I use first. It is a pretty big camera on its own, so I like to keep things as lightweight as possible. I really don't bring that much with it at all when it comes to traveling. I start off with the 6K Pro on the body itself, so no battery grips, no handles, no nothing, just the 6K Pro. I attach it to my Sigma 18-35 lens, the f1.8 lens, and sometimes I do attach a Tiffin filter, the Pro Mist filter, on the outside of it as well if I'm traveling at night, but most often it is just the Sigma 18-35 lens and that's it. For control and everything, I use the Peak Design slide strap which goes around my neck on the 6K Pro and is really great for stability. And finally, inside the camera, I put in my 1TB Angelbird CFast card, which is really great as it records so much data and I rarely have to swap out the card or have to offload footage. Although I do back up my footage all the time when I am traveling, I don't tend to have to delete stuff and take it off. It works a treat. So it's not really much of a rig in its own. In the end, if you weren't a keen-eyed photographer or cinematographer like you or I, then you wouldn't notice or put apart that this camera is a 6K B-raw capturing cinema camera, and you just think it's a DSLR because altogether the package is really nice, especially with the Peak Design slide, and this is how I travel all the time with it. Now let's start off with one of the reasons why I love using this camera for travel, and it is one of the reasons that this camera is most famous for, and that is its image quality. At this price point, you just can't find a camera out there that shoots in this much high level of quality and flexibility. The quality comes from 3 big things I find: the Gen 5 color science, the incredible dynamic range, as well as the sheer amount of resolution that you get out of this camera, and they just make the images look absolutely gorgeous. I often found myself at the end of the day just swiping through the camera before I did any grading at all, just looking at all the footage, because ungraded with a LUT based onto there, it just looked fantastic. The detail the camera holds at 6K in both night and daytime is absolutely beautiful, and also it allows you to punch in quite a bit before you go below 4K, meaning if you did need to do any post stabilization or reframing, it's no problem at all. You can always just punch in easily. The camera also does offer so much flexibility when it does come to shooting for travel content. Being able to shoot in B-raw is a massive benefit, as paired with Davinci Resolve, you have so much latitude to correct and color your shots later in post exactly how you like it without pushing the camera too far that would generate artifacts you'd see in a lot of 8-bit color cameras out there. Particularly in night scenes, I've completely underexposed my shots in the past because of the run and gun style nature of travel cinematography, and as a result, because of all this extra data that's captured with B-raw, I'm able to do a little bit of tweaking in Davinci Resolve and bring the image back just how I like it in post. Another massive feature when it comes to using this camera for travel is the easy menus. I absolutely love how massive the buttons are and easily laid out all of the settings. I've been using the camera for a couple years now, and within a few seconds it's almost muscle memory. The touchscreen on the back is just like the multi-touch surface on your iPhone or any other smartphone out there. It's not one of those capacitive, disgusting LCDs that a lot of other camera manufacturers have, and I think a lot of other manufacturers really need to just copy what Blackmagic's doing, or in the end I'm just fine with Blackmagic doing it that way, because it's such a great menu system and it's really easy. If I just wanted to quickly change a setting like compression ratio, add a different aspect ratio when it comes to frame guides, it's easily being able to just tap away rather than having to dig through all these dials in the menus, and that is a big bonus when you are doing travel for cinematography, because you're always changing stuff as you're not in a controlled environment. And of course, speaking of the menu, is obviously that screen. It is giant. The 5-inch touchscreen is just like your smartphone, as I said, so you can pinch and zoom and sit back on long trips and enjoy watching your footage straight on the camera rather than having to look at a tiny screen. There are so many times on the trips in Vietnam and Bali where I was literally just sitting on the airplane or a train just watching my clips, not on my iPad or my phone or my Mac, just on the back of the 6K Pro, and I love doing this. Unique to the 6K Pro as well, and one of my favorite features of the camera, is the built-in internal NDs. Now this means that I can keep my 180-degree shutter rule and as well have a low aperture, which means I've got a lot of shallow depth of field when I'm particularly filming a lot of subjects. This is fantastic because I don't have to overexpose my image and I can just step up the NDs a few stops and ensure that I keep all those settings that I like. Unlike a lot of cameras out there that don't have built-in NDs, you have to bring around another filter, which is really annoying, or multiple sets of NDs and keep changing it when the sun changes throughout. So for a travel camera, built-in NDs are amazing, and that's why I love using them and not really having to bring out too much extra gear in the end. Now this is obviously a feature that is unique to the 6K Pro and isn't present on the 4K, 6K and the 6K G2, but the fold-out screen on the 6K and the 6K G2 are again some major features that I love about using these cameras for travel. Essentially, when you are going and doing those low shots, you can tilt the screen, or if you're going those high shots, you can tilt them from above, and it makes it work absolutely perfectly. Another great reason why I love these two cameras for travel. But then again, if you are considering the 4K and the 6K, it is good to keep in mind that those cameras don't have the fold-out screens, which is another huge benefit for using this camera for travel. Which brings me to a few points that I wanted to mention that make this camera not ideal for travel compared to some other cameras out there. Now, don't get me wrong, I still love using the pocket cinema cameras for travel, but these are just a few things to keep in mind, and all this kind of really boils down to one big word, and that is convenience. To put this as kind of a metaphor, I guess, the pocket cinema cameras are kind of like driving an old heritage car. They look absolutely incredible, they're so much fun to drive, the quality is amazing, the build materials, it's all great, and you love the image that comes out of it, or in the case of the car, you love driving it. But in the end, it is a manual and you have to do everything manually. There's no suspension, there's no cruise control, there's no auto blipping and everything. And this is really what this camera is quite about. It is not like a lot of those other DSLRs out there that have all the nice and handy features that make them modern cameras. What makes the pocket cinema cameras so affordable is the image quality that makes it so much higher above any other camera in its price class, and as a result of this, it does need to have some sacrifices, which is why it is missing a few key convenient features. Now, the first big one being no autofocus is a huge deal breaker for some, and that is a big thing that you need to keep in mind of. You'll really have to rely on manually focusing, which can be a bit tricky when you're running and gunning shooting, especially for travel, and most importantly, this can be really tricky when it comes to moving subjects. But I personally enjoy sitting down and focusing, but as I said, it can be a big deal breaker for some, but I love being able to purposefully choose where I want the camera to focus rather than worrying about what phase detection robotic nonsense that a camera might choose to focus on whenever it sees something moving in the background. It's really a personal choice in this case, but one thing to keep in mind of with travel, you do often rely on autofocus, and this is just not there, not usable, I have to say. Now secondly, the lack of IBIS or any type of inbuilt or robotic stabilization, this can be a little bit tricky for some, but honestly, this is something that I don't mind at all. In combination with my Peak Design strap that I hang around my neck, with a bit of tension holding the camera steady, I'm able to get pretty stable footage. Plus, paired with gyro data that is actually collected inside of the camera as part of its metadata, Davinci Resolve's gyro stabilization feature 9 times out of 10 works really well. You also have options like perspective stabilization, and I like to switch between these two depending on how it works when I'm editing it in post. Although I haven't, but I highly recommend using the camera with a lens that has IBIS, like Canon's EF lenses like the 16-35, the 24-70, or even the 70-200. I only have used the Sigma 18-35 when it comes to traveling with the Pocket 6K Pro, but if you do use a lens, try and maybe get one with inbuilt stabilization or something that has stabilization of some kind, and it might be even more stable, which is really great. And again, not a big problem for me, but there is an evident lack of weather sealing with this camera. It has open exhaust ports because the camera itself, and I think it's the case as well with the other Pocket Cinema cameras, but it has an exhaust fan which does blow out hot air, so any type of water that goes into the camera or dust or anything like that, you can pretty much say goodnight to the camera too. And although the camera is built quite nicely and I haven't dropped it, knock on wood so far, if I did get it into a precarious situation like that, I feel like the camera would break very quickly. So other common inconveniences compared to other DSLRs out there is the battery life. Now I typically carry, as I said, 3 Sony NPF 570 batteries, which are from Blackmagic themselves, or at least the branded ones, and they last me around about an hour each. I always carried about 3 of them on me whenever I was going out for the whole day, and I never actually ran out of 3 of those batteries, and again, 3 hours of shooting. So that is one thing to keep in mind, they last around about an hour each, but compared to another camera out there that usually gets around 2 or 3 hours per battery, Again, just something to keep in mind that you'll have to carry an extra set of batteries around, but honestly, I didn't really mind at all. If you are going with the 4K or the 6K pocket cinema cameras, I have heard that the battery life is a whole lot worse, between 20 and 30 minutes, so that is definitely something that would deter me from using those for travel, and that's why I think the 6K Pro is a great overall camera and very, very usable in cases like this. Another thing as well is that the 6K Pro is definitely a lot larger compared to other DSLR cameras out there. It's not overly large, and I like using it in the DSLR type mode, just with the lens and body and the strap, but honestly it is a little bit bigger compared to other cameras. I've got massive hands, so it's not much of a problem for me, but again, something to keep in mind, and especially if you are going to fly it on a gimbal. And lastly, the large file sizes. In Vietnam, I think my whole project just from the 6K Pro was around about 450 gigabytes, and with the other trip to Bali, which I only went for 1 week, and the Vietnam trip was 2 weeks, that one was only 200 gigabytes, so you will need a lot of storage, especially if you're going to film at anything below 5:1 compression, or even 8:1 compression, that matter. So in the end, is this camera right for you for when it comes to traveling? Firstly, as you know, I use the 6K Pro for travel, and although I haven't used the Pocket 4K or 6K, I'm inclined to really just not recommend those cameras due to the fact that they're far more suitable for big rig builds. The battery life on those cameras, as I mentioned, aren't really ideal, plus the lack of a fold-out screen and built-in ND filters are pretty much deal breakers for me if I wanted to use those cameras for travel. But if you're comparing the 6K Pro against other cameras out there, I have to say I love it for travel. It produces beautiful images and it's so damn easy to use and get wonderful video out of. However, it is completely inconvenient in a lot of cases. No autofocus, no stabilization means that you'll probably have to bring a gimbal, and then I personally have never used a gimbal with it when it comes to travel, but it's just something to keep in mind. That's another whole setup that you got to do. So if you want something easy to use just to capture some good quality images, maybe go for something else. But if you're ready to deal with those inconvenient features, then maybe it is right for you. So if you're in the same situation like me, where you really want to use a camera mostly for work, which is what I use this camera for predominantly, you can totally just grab this camera and use it for travel too. But if you're looking about buying a camera solely for travel and not really use it for work at all, I probably would look elsewhere, I must say. Lastly, compared to other DSLRs out there or mirrorless cameras, if you are looking to take photos for your travel trip and video out of the one camera, I must say, don't get the 6K Pro or any of the Pocket Cinema cameras. It is pretty obvious in the end. They aren't photography cameras, although they do take incredible stills if you're just going to screenshot out of the video clips because you are shooting at 6K. I have to say, look elsewhere if you're looking to take photos. I use this camera along with my DJI Mini 3 Pro and my Fujifilm X100V, and that creates a nice little travel camera arsenal. So again, if you're going to use it for only using for travel, maybe look a bit elsewhere too. And that's all. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to let me know. Have a wonderful week ahead, stay safe, and of course, do take care.